What's good, everyone? So by clicking on this video, you're either here to learn about CW and how to play her at her full potential, or just hear me yap again for some extended amount of time. Either way, this will be a video offering a much more in-depth guide than just basic, rotation and stuff. If you find this helpful, I do recommend subscribing and letting others know about this video. Now, let's get on to it. First of all, we're going to start by completely skipping over the signal orbs and all that other basic stuff. All you need to know is that they do damage, and you should cancel the yellow orb at any time. Pretty simple. If you want to know more about it, I recommend either reading or just playing the character. Let's move on to the actual challenging part of her rotation. Crimson Weave is a very challenging character to master. This is mainly due to how much she can possibly vary from each cycle in her rotation. Don't get what I mean? Allow me to demonstrate. In the simplest form, her rotation will boil down to getting her first ult, doing her core passive, which I will be referring to as dash from now on, holding the basic attack, which I will be referring to as slam from now on, and completing the cycle with her second ult. But none of these are really set in stone. Even though her slam is the main part of her damage, you don't really have to use it right away, and sometimes in a game mode like Warzone it's better to just quickly double to finish off weak enemies by dashing with a 3-ping so you can save the slam on another enemy. And on the same side of that coin, you don't also have to limit yourself to one slam per cycle, and instead double slam if needed. And though it's less likely, the same can be said about the dash as well. Knowing the when, why, and how is what separates an average player from the more experienced player. That's what we will be learning today. But first, we should start with the basics, just so everyone's on the right track. For the basic solo Crimson Weave rotation, it's actually pretty simple. First, you start off on Garnet. If you don't have Garnet, starting on anyone else but Alpha would do, and then you will switch to Alpha. Your main goal at this point is to enter your Odachi form as fast as possible. There is a couple ways of doing this, like sword waves, blue orbs, and even doing a full dash. For this rotation, I will mainly be focusing on full dashing to achieve your first ult. While in the Odachi form, your objective here is to dash while QTs are available to trigger both. Trigger your slam, and finish it off with her second ult to complete the set. During your second and every cycle after, you should notice that your QTEs aren't up yet. During this time, you want to perform a filler to set up for when the QTEs are available again, which will boil down to 3 possible things you can do. 1. Doing 2 3-pings, which will fill the sword gauge, and then sword waves to increase the aphotic gauge, which will increase the damage of the next slam. 2. Using only 1 3-ping to half fill the sword gauge, sword waving to fill the aphotic gauge, then charging the sword gauge to full, and using it when the QTs are available. And lastly, just throwing some sword waves and charging the sword gauge to full, and then dashing when the QTs are available. Basically, you want to try and use the first 2 options and avoid getting into a situation where you need to use the third, as it significantly gives less numbers on the aphotic gauge, making your slam do way less damage, which can be easily prevented by fluctuating between the first 2 and not just spamming the first option because it does more damage. Remember that resource management is key, and the general goal in mind is to be able to do just enough damage to slam to kill, or almost kill a wave and have her ult chain over to the other waves. Okay, I kinda lied about it being basic. But the TLDR of this entire thing is ult 1, prep for QTE, dash, slam, ult 2, rinse and repeat. Now let's move into some possible alternating variants you can do. Double slam. This move is pretty situational in this solo rotation, but I'll put it out there anyway. Double slam is a move where you, slam twice. This can be used to split your damage to multiple waves in Warzone if an enemy was significantly damaged or very squishy to where your slam would just be a huge overkill to the mob. Do keep in mind that this move doesn't double your damage, but rather splits your high burst into 2 weak ones, since you most likely won't be in a position where you overcap your Aphotic Gauge. That and her slam isn't time stopped, so you're pretty much wasting time if you're not doing it for the reasons previously mentioned. This technique doesn't require that much setup though, since you should be entering ult 1 by dashing on the solo rotation. Quick ult. This move will be used for PPC mainly, and for that last second damage on Warzone. This one is pretty easy. Basically what you want to do is while you're in ult 1, you're going to dash and then use a 3-ping after. Now that we have the main tech out the way, I'll take the time to explain some very crucial details. I see quite a bit of people asking, why does Crimson Weave solo? Isn't switching better? Generally, it is better to switch on most teams, assuming your team's DPS doesn't take a nosedive when you do it. Crimson Weave is just put in a unique situation where her partners are Lux, a character that came out at the beginning of the game, and Garnet, a Gen 1 unit. Since Gen 2 attackers deal and sustain pretty high DPS, it's just better to stay on Crimson Weave than tanking your DPS the moment you switch to Lux. If Hyperreal or Balter was in the same position, they would probably do the same. Next, I want to mention that Garnet's flag is kind of something you gotta work around with when doing QTEs on Crimson Weave. When enemies are under the effect of Time Stop, they won't be affected by already present debuffs on the field. In other words, if an enemy just spawns in during Crimson Weave using her second ult, and they get hit by the dot of Garnet's flag, they will not be affected by any of the debuffs that ties with it, making Garnet's flag effectively useless. So how do we deal with this? The most common way is just to QT while we're trying to deal damage on ult, as this will be a fresh hit and therefore apply debuffs on hit. Lux QTE is another thing you will have to work around. Her QTE field is something that requires you to stay in it at all times. You see, at SS she gains a buff that will increase your damage, but it comes at the condition that you stay inside of her circle. Meaning, the second you leave this small circle, you miss out on 20% lightning damage until you get back in, of course. A very simple way to deal with this is just to QTE after dashing, so you don't accidentally drop her field in an unfavorable position. And you also just want to stay relatively close to the enemy, so when you slam on Crimson Weave, she doesn't somehow leave the QTE. And that should be it. I do recommend taking what I said and putting it to practice yourself, as there's only so much you'd be able to learn from a guy rambling on how to play a character. But hopefully, this does point you towards the right direction on how to play Crimson Weave properly. There will be a video in the close future where I perform this rotation with a low rank Crimson Weave against 2 other familiar faces. But until then, be sure to subscribe and share this video to whoever might find this helpful. Until then.